launch to tomorrow morning. The statement saying, "Hi everyone, we've been asked to move our launch to tomorrow morning. We will see you then. Thanks for supporting us. This is just the beginning." Continuing on, they say,
Impressive Canadian ingenuity in full display. If you thought we would let Kim Jong-un keep the title of Rocket Man away from our dear leader, Mark Carney, you were sadly mistaken. Even the Americans are shaking at their knees. But please tell me that this school-level arts and craft project surely couldn't have cost taxpayers that much money, right? My name is Ali Dango, and this is the Right Call Report. Like, share, subscribe. Any interactions on this channel helps get the truth out, and maybe someday break that CBC-induced coma that so many Canadians are under. And why keep it to the CBC? We're going to space, boys! Push the truth intergalactically. And if you're tired of that same old government and media BS and finally want some common sense commentary, well then smash that subscribe button because you found the right place. Canada is LARPing as a galactic empire. I swear Carney gives me the Darth Vader vibes these days. Screw the Republic. The Empire will protect you.
I introduced the Canadian Space Launch Act in Parliament. This act will deliver Canadian sovereign space launch capabilities. Currently, we must rely on foreign countries, most often the United States, to get Canadian satellites in orbit. This reliance on the US sends investment out of our country, creates costly delays, and leaves critical infrastructure exposed to decisions beyond our control.
Oh no, the Americans! The Americans are coming, they're coming. We need to create a spaceport. We need to go to space. And costly delays. Who are we fooling? We are the masters at costly delays. We cannot be outdone with that. Self-inflicted. But honestly, at face value, it sounds like a decently cool project. Canada will become sovereign in its space launch capability, and it feeds into the narrative of elbows up and anti-American rhetoric. You won't have to worry about these pesky Americans anymore. But in typical Canadian fashion, the second you remove the lipstick on the pig, you realize the inner workings are not quite what they're being portrayed as. And the entire plan falls apart. Oh, and it appears to be just one giant money pit that serves only the interest of a few people. Who may that be? But before we look into who's going to be making a shit ton of money on this entire project, we have to look at physics. Basic physics. It's a thing that no amount of Canadian ingenuity and wishful thinking can overcome. Here's a low inconvenient fact. It's significantly easier to launch to space from near the equator. Why? Well, Earth spins eastwards, and at the equator, it's moving the fastest, roughly 1,670 kilometers per hour to be exact. And as you travel progressively north or south, that speed drops all the way down to 0 at the poles. Therefore, when you launch at the equator, you inherit that free speed. But what does that free speed give you? Well, it equals to a roughly 15% performance gain, which means less fuel is needed, heavier payloads can be carried, and it carries a much cheaper cost. And that is why every nation in the world launches from as close to the equator as possible. See, the Americans launched their spacecraft from the southernmost point they can find in the contiguous United States, namely in Florida, right here at Cape Canaveral, located next to Orlando, the armpit of Florida. Don't go there, it blows. Cape Canaveral sits at 28.5 degrees north of latitude, so not quite the equator, but as close as they can get. Meanwhile, you're going to say, yeah, but Europe has a space agency and they launched their rockets. So, I mean, Europe tends to be fairly high in latitude, right? Yeah, right here. Except you're forgetting Europe is kind of like all over the place, right? So, Europe's spaceport is actually in French Guyana, right here. I mean, this is as close to the equator as you can get. And it sits at just 5.2 degrees north of latitude. This is optimal launch site. But what about China? China. Well, China launches it from the most southern point that they can find, which is this tiny little island right here, which sits at 19.6 degrees north of latitude. And now this leads us to Canada. Well, we're going to be launching from Canso, Nova Scotia. Not even the southernmost point we can find. No. Right here. Canso, hello. Yep. It sits at 45.1 degrees north. We are so far north. And as such, this is completely the worst place you could ever launch a spacecraft from. So back to our $40 billion space launch industry that we're trying to create here. I really wonder which company and subcontractor Brookfield owns or invests in that will ultimately become the beneficiary of this $40 billion industry. So let's see. If you thought the intro video was fake, it wasn't. That was really what Canada's spaceport looks like. Here's a clearer picture of it. This, right here. I'm not kidding. It's literally a concrete slab with some gravel around it. It's that ludicrous. You know, Canadians just want to be able to afford homes, but Canada says the best we can do is Canada Space Launch Act. But don't weep just yet, because I'm about to show you it gets considerably worse. Because this state-of-the-art spaceport is actually being leased by the Canadian government from a company called Maritime Launch Services at the tune of $20 million per year for a 10-year contract. That's $200 million total for those really astute in mathematics. $200 million of government money for a concrete slab. Except Maritime Launch Services doesn't actually own the land. The government does, and leases it to Maritime at a tune of $13,500 a year. See, this press release was posted in 2022. Today, Maritime Launch Services is pleased to announce that the company has signed a Crown land lease with the province of Nova Scotia for land to develop and operate Spaceport Nova Scotia. This represents about 334.5 acres of Crown land, blah, blah, blah. And then the company built this on 334 acres, right here, this concrete slab. And then after that, leased it back to the government for $20 million a year. A total of $200 million. This, right here, $200 million. I mean, I wish I was making this up. This is beyond levels of stupidity. This is something that only the Canadian government could ever aspire to accomplish. Now, here comes the massive con job. You thought I was just going to make fun of the concrete slab? No. I looked way deeper into this. See, there's a company called MDA, and that company is deeply enmeshed with Mark Carney, but we'll get around to it in a sec. MDA and Maritime have both Canadian government connections. Again, we're going to look into this. Now, MDA lobbied the government 35 times between May 4th and November 4th of 2025. That's 6 months. Now, Maritime Launch Services, right? The people that just built that amazing concrete slab. Now, if you look back at November 2nd of 2025, Maritime Launch Services declared yearly earnings of $35 millions? Billions? Nah, $35,000 per year. That is effectively nothing. That is a company that makes no money. I mean, they make less than the average Canadian does in employment income. And for that year of 2025, they actually declared net losses of $47.28 million. But don't worry, making money doesn't matter when you got connections with the government. Because a day later, MDA, which is a Canadian company that makes satellite components, buys for $10 million worth of penny stocks into Maritime Launch Services, the company that makes less than a Canadian does in employment income. And then, shocker, one day later, the federal budget drops and it includes $182.6 million for a sovereign space launch capability. What a coincidence. If this is not insider trading and knowledge of confidential, private, and privileged information on the part of certain executives at MDA and MLS, then I don't know what is. Having government connections really helps you. What are those government connections, by the way? But we'll look at it. Just give me a sec. Because it gets good. So back to MDA, that company that lobbied the government for 6 months straight. And I took a massive gamble, apparently investing $10 million into Maritime Launch Services, a company that makes no money whatsoever. All of a sudden sees their investment double in one day, because after the announcement that Canada was going to invest $189 million in space launches, guess what happened to the MLS stock? It doubled in value. And today, that stock has risen 205%. So that's a $20 million profit for MDA. Now, why should you care about MDA? Who are they? What do they do? Why does this matter? Well, first you need to know that what is good for MDA is good for Telesat. Telesat is a company that operates satellites whose CEO is named Dan Goldberg. Telesat and MDA, they do a lot of business together. As a matter of fact, Telesat is building Lightspeed, a global low Earth orbit broadband constellation. MDA is involved in supporting the subsystems and the space infrastructure of this entire operation. Well, the government is investing $2.5 billion in this Lightspeed project. We basically told the Americans F off, SpaceX F off. We're going to build our own low Earth orbit satellites at something like 10 times the cost. And this is going right into the pockets of Telesat and MDA. Now, remember I said MDA's CEO is Dan Goldberg. Well, there's the connection. Dan is best friends with Mark Carney, like best pals, which I've covered before in a report from a couple months ago. So would it come as a shock to you if I said that Mark Carney has a long-standing and well-documented personal friendship with a key controlling individual of Telesat Corporation? No other than Daniel Goldberg, its president and CEO since 2006. Yep. I wish I was making that one up. Once again. Well, at least it's not Brookfield this time. I mean, everyone's got to get a piece of the pie. But Elliot, how do you know they're good friends? Are you just taking this right out of your rear? Well, I'll get to this article in 1 second, but Mark Carney and Daniel Goldberg met in 04-05 in Ottawa when their children were in the same preschool soccer league. All right, I mean, whatever, right? Coincidence. However, Goldberg visited Carney in London during Carney's Bank of England governorship. That was 2013 to 2020, may I add, because we know Mark Carney is our favorite long-term snowbird. Effectively, he's just never in Canada. And I mean, even as prime minister, he's always over the world. He's not really here. But anyway, so they ran the London Marathon together. Kudos to them. Very good. Also, Carney publicly praised Goldberg's CEO skills in a 2019 profile. Now, this is the article I got right here. And although we won't go through it all because honestly, it's just a circle jerk-ish of, you know, I love you and you love me. I just want to read one little line right here. So you got Carney just praising Daniel, you know, just a bro-y stuff. So the admiration in Carney's voice speaks volume about Goldberg, a low-key yet accomplished business leader you'll find in Ottawa. Yeah, wonder why. Anyways, now obviously their friendship became a little bit politically controversial around 2024, 2025, like, you know, recently, over government loans and contracts that Telesat received. You know, the entire premise of what I'm talking about right now. But since Goldberg is such a highly esteemed business leader, he came out and stated that Carney had absolutely nothing to do with the approvals of these contracts and loans. Of course not. You know, that's the thing. I'm convinced of that. I'm sure Carney didn't sign off on them personally. But I mean, do they take us for idiots? Let's be honest. Things happen behind closed doors. It's not far-fetched to think that Carney would tell Minister so-and-so, who would speak to Deputy Minister so-and-so, who would talk to the general manager of so-and-so and say, look, listen, we're going with these guys because, you know, I told you so. That's, again, politics, guys. It's not the best that wins. It's who you know. And in Mark Carney's government, it appears to be Brookfield 99.9% of the time, and apparently it's Telesat now. So as long as you're good buddies and your kids go to preschool together and you run a low marathon together, here comes the billions. Now, let's make this even worse if it's even possible. So, September 30th, 2025, Maritime Launch Services files MD&A stating insufficient sources of operating cash flow to meet its ongoing needs. Well, no shit, you're generating $35,000 a year, and you're losing millions. They claim that they have 6 employees, $20 million in working capital deficiency, and survival depends on raising more money. A few months later, March 16th, 2026, the Canadian government announces a $200 million taxpayer bailout. On April 9th, 2026, the chairman of MLS, Sasha Jacob, sells $1.8 million of stocks. So you went from a fundamentally bankrupt company to pocketing nearly $2 million. Then on April 15th, 2026, the same Jacob exercised options for $974,000, another $1 million in his pockets. In a few short months, this company that only had a concrete pad for years went from nearly broke to receiving $200 million of government contracts, and then $3 million of insider cash out. Thank you, taxpayers. And if you really think that the Canadian government is not all freaking enmeshed with this company at the highest level, here's an article from November 22nd, 2021. That goes way back. And you have right here an event to highlight the ramping up of Maritime Launch Services Spaceport development, aka building a concrete slab. And who attended this? Who do we have right here? The little goblin? Well, that's Finance Minister Champagne. And of course, our favorite, the boy wonder, the Midas touch. Everything he touches doesn't turn to gold, it turns to shit. Sean Fraser. What were they doing there in 2021? I don't think they thought this photograph would come back. Look, Canada has turned into a banana republic. It's effectively one big puppet show ran by Carney, Brookfield, and their best pals in order to enrich themselves and to subtract as much money from the Canadian taxpayer as they can. Imagine that. Imagine having access to effectively unlimited funds. There's just a little hiccup. You can't just cut yourself a check. That would be illegal. But there are many ways around that little pesky issue. And what you're seeing right here, what you're witnessing, is a world-class demonstration in how to enrich yourself at the hands of a country that funds you. It is beyond twisted and despicable. And in another most twisted and despicable and a little ironic turn of event, down south in the US, an activist group which described itself as a beacon of hope fighting white supremacy and various forms of injustice to help create a multiracial democracy where we can all live and thrive, well, they were caught doing the opposite. Because it turns out that they were actually funding a large number of right-wing extremist groups, organizations, and events.
Southern Poverty Law Center, in a massive, sweeping indictment, has been charged with allegations of fraud and using the banking system to perpetrate that fraud. I just want to talk about a couple brief things here. The Southern Poverty Law Center themselves advertise to raise money to dismantle violent extremist groups for a period of at least a decade. They used their donor network to raise money to purportedly dismantle violent extremist groups. However, the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, used the money they raised from their donor network to actually pay the leadership of these very groups.
Let's take a little look at the SPLC's website here. They defend racial justice issues. They want to strengthen democracy and voting rights. They want to dismantle white supremacy. They want to end unjust imprisonment. And they want elimination of poverty and economic inequality. First the South, then the nation, they claim. But who did they fund with all those donations they received? Well, they paid $1 million plus to the National Alliance affiliate. They paid over $300,000 to the Aryan Nations affiliate. Ooh. They paid $270,000 plus to Unite the Right. They paid $140,000 to former National Alliance chairman. They paid $73,000 to former KKK members. What? And they paid $19,000 to American Front president and a felon on top of that. That's beautiful. Now, the media, as usual, was right on the ball, asking all the pressing, high IQ questions.
I want to make sure I understand. You're alleging that the Southern Poverty Law Center was paying the leaders of KKK and other groups to continue their operations? Is that...
I'm not alleging it. The grand jury returned an indictment that says that. And so what...
Well, I'm glad to see it's not just the CBC that sucks. Apparently some American journalists also do. Still better than Rachel Gilmore. Now, I want to highlight a comment made by millennial Republicans on this video. I quote, "There is so little actual racism in America that the SPLC had to pay extremist groups to put on a show and support their narrative that America is racist. Very glad action has been taken against the SPLC." That's a good point. Now, here are my thoughts. It's always those that scream the loudest against a specific problem that are in fact responsible for that problem. It's a great tactic to control the narrative. Accuse the other side of what you are yourself guilty of doing. It puts them on the defensive, shifts the scrutiny upon them. But most importantly, if the other side actually goes against you for what you are in fact guilty of, it just appears as retaliation in the public eye and loses all credibility. There's also the angle that these groups and organizations only exist so long as there's a boogeyman to fight. So if there's no boogeyman, best believe they will manufacture one. It makes you wonder about the parallels in Canada. The groups and individuals that will call anyone they disagree with fascists. The groups and individuals that under the guise of safety continuously seek to restrict your rights and freedoms. So speaking of manufactured boogeyman, can you say, in a more dangerous and divided world?
The world is more divided and dangerous.
As the world becomes more divided and dangerous, Canadians are uniting.
And we live in an increasingly dangerous, divided, and intolerant world. We become united in the face of a more dangerous and divided world,
And in a more dangerous and divided world, we are ever more grateful for your
In a more divided and uncertain world.
It is a more dangerous and divided world, unfortunately. We're meeting at one of those hinge moments, those turning points in history. The world's more divided and
In a
dangerous.
fast-changing, more divided, more uncertain world.
Happy holidays, Canada.
In a more divided and uncertain
The
world,
world's more divided and dangerous. We will reinforce Canada's security for an increasingly dangerous and divided world.
So here's the current situation. The world, as I said earlier, is more dangerous and divided. More dangerous and divided.
So is the world actually more dangerous and divided than ever? Or is it just simply something that he keeps manufacturing in order to control more effectively? I think the answer is quite obvious. Now, for today's crazy liberal take of the day, we're not actually going to look at a liberal. We're going to be looking at a liberally ran city, my hometown, Montreal. Nah, this was not Mogadishu and this was not a joke. This is really what Montreal looks like. And you want to know kicker? When you inadvertently hit that pothole going 50 kilometers an hour and blow a tire or two or a rim or two, you can't even sue the city. It's no fault policy. So you have no recourse against the city, which means there's also no liability and no incentive for the city to fix any of this. It's just tough luck. We'll get around to it one day, maybe somehow. And this is coming from someone who's actually had his 2 front tires blown up, hitting a pothole like that. You know what's insidious? In the middle of, say, when it's raining, those potholes become completely invisible and you get screwed hard. And it leads to the question, is it just a shortage of money? I think not. Our taxes have increased and the revenue for governments at many levels, municipal, provincial, federal, has never been so high. So then, if it's not money the issue, because if you compare it to a decade ago, 2 decades ago, heck, 50 years ago, these issues were not around. So then it becomes what? Management issue? Culture issue? Just general apathy and an attitude of what the hell when it comes to our very own standards of living? I don't know. People complain all the time, but ultimately nobody holds them accountable. And we were told to just suffer and, oh, yeah, we need to pay more taxes. But don't worry, because in a more dangerous and divided world, we have our Prime Minister Mark Carney, who addressed the nation just a few days ago. I did a whole breakdown of this and how much it is just full of lies. So click on the video right here and give it a listen. Plus, on top of that, little lulls, a little funny thing coming from the Senate, because of course our expert witnesses are always such expert. You won't believe who it is. Anyways, for the time being, my name is Elliot Degno, and I'll see you guys next episode.